Hello, everyone. This is Chirag Joshi, and welcome to another edition of the Art of Cybersecurity series. This episode is a bit different, and I'll start by saying that. It's different for multiple reasons, as you will discover as we get in the conversation. But it's different because I'm doing this with someone I consider as a very good friend, someone who is a great mentor, and someone who has been in industry for longer and has actually done a lot of great things. But before we introduce him, I'll just mention why this conversation turned out today. So Branko, who is our guest today, Branko and I actually just last week were presenting together in Melbourne at one of Australia's largest cyber conference on exactly this topic. The topic being art of hacking the brain in cybersecurity. And it's an interesting play on words, I guess, because hacking has connotations in cybersecurity. But the way we've thought about this is hacking the brain. It's not just our own brain, which we got hacked, and we'll talk about why we need to hack our brain to optimize our well-being. But it's also hacking the brain of others who we rely on for their support, for their collaboration, to achieve meaningful progress to what we want to do, is to secure our people, secure our systems, secure our information. And you can hack brains and, in a nice way, influence and persuade others when you know how it works and when you know how to communicate cyber in a way people understand. So there are multiple aspects of this conversation. So I'm really keen to get started. And with that in mind, I will formally introduce Branko Ninkovic. And Branko, I just mentioned that you've done a lot of great things in cybersecurity, but you are a founder. You founded an amazing company. You are a board director with one of the more prominent cybersecurity associations here in Australia, and you do a lot of different things in industry. So I'm so delighted to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thanks, Chirag. Thanks for inviting me to come along and have a chat.
It's my pleasure. So Branko, now we'll just kick off, and I just mentioned a couple of things about you, but for the audience, would you just like talk about a little bit about yourself, and then we can get in the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess those that know me know I don't like to talk much about myself. I like to kind of just, sit in the background in the wings and, kind of just push things along. But yeah, Chirag's correct. In early 2005, I did found a cybersecurity company, which was back then information security, because cyber is all new in this day and age today. Since then, we've grown into quite a successful company, 17, 18 years on. Got a great team of people that work with me to make sure to realize that dream is success and to keep kind of powering on. But I guess the key thing along those journey of those 15, 16 years is just how much you can learn about yourself and how much you need to understand yourself to be able to kind of push on mentally and physically, because it is quite a draining exercise. And I guess the title of both our talk when we were at the conference last week and here today was largely around hacking. And I think hacking is, in my mind, it's about understanding. When you don't have all the pieces or all the knowledge in front of you. I mean, neuroscience is fantastic. It's wonderful. It's a whole field. So is psychology and positive psychology. There's a lot of information to it. There's a lot of material. There's a lot of personal development material that people can look and read and find out. And I think everyone through each in their life's journeys, they all look for how to be successful and how to be happy. And I think it's never a done thing. I think happiness is continuous, and it's something that you can't just find and stay at that peak performance of happy. You have to understand how that works. And I've kind of managed to kind of find some framing around that through my own experiences and also through, what others have told me and shared with me and also what I've learned. So I guess that's what we're going to talk about, right? We're going to kind of dig in a bit into that and see, how much we can offer the listeners back, and, hopefully we provide some insight.
No, definitely. And look, I think that's an important point. You hit on so many key things there just in your introduction with regards to happiness, with regards to well-being. And you and I, and we've talked about this before, is we are not doctors or medical health professionals or folks in that industry.
Right,
so what we are talking about today is based on our experience of what works, what has worked in our own respective journeys. When I wrote both of my books, I had to do a fair bit of understanding of like my experiences, but also research in the field to see what influences people, how people optimize their well-being,
Mm.
the common traits of successful professionals who we've seen, and including in our lives. So I think it's a combination of our perspective and our learnings along the way.
Mm.
So I think which is what makes this conversation to me is very interesting, because coming from a practitioner's perspective, people who work in cyber, people who lead cyber, and are now offering a perspective on what actually works for them and what they
Yeah.
have seen work. So with that, Branko, let me just first start with I won't call it a question. I'll call it a discussion area. Is what is the problem? Is I just for our listeners, let's frame the problem of the challenges we face in cybersecurity, especially cybersecurity professionals.
Yeah.
Some of the studies, say that northwards of 50% of cyber professionals are on some form of medication to cope with the stress, which is a staggering number if that's actually the case.
Mhm.
But we know anecdotally, and we know from people we see, is that is definitely a lot of stress in cybersecurity,
Mhm.
and people are coping with it in different ways. So I just want to hand over to you, just kind of frame it up for us as to why the stress, where does it come from?
It's a very good point, and the key word there is stress. And I think stress is not just specific to cybersecurity. I think stress is in everyday life. I think in family life, with children, if you have children, partners, stress is part of our it's in our sort of like circular around what we do, and stress can kind of really impact us and cause us to have certain feelings, and feelings can cause us to have certain behaviors, and those behaviors can shape who we are and what we become each day as we unfold in that environment of a stressful environment. It's now stress is, it's not to say, you can just change stress. It's something that you have to kind of look through quite closely, and also try and identify cause and effect, and also trying to identify, where's the stress coming from? Is it something that you're putting on the other person, or is that something environmental? So there's a lot to be unpacked when it comes to stress. But I think a lot of the things that we're seeing today is really around burnout. So I think there's just so much like an always on society, with so much media and so much social media, and also just in our domains that we're working in cybersecurity. So, it's just a plethora of, data breaches that are kind of rolling off the treadmill now, and kind of just hitting the mainstream media. And as a result, it's making a lot of people nervous, and it's causing a lot of, significant sort of attention in politicians and politics, and the media are printing this like there's no tomorrow. So there's the stress of those, and the burnout of those that are dealing with those incidents. But even in every day, I think there's just stress, burnout, and burnout leads to a level of anxiety. And anxiety is what is the ultimate crushing component to someone's, ability to kind of get up and do and feel motivated, because it's just all empowering. And to the point where, if you have enough of these sort of negative feelings, which is where the brain comes from, it lives in the zone of we're being chased constantly by a tiger. It's kind of going to have some physical effect on us as well. People have stomach cramps or issues that come through that as a result. But yeah, I think that's key at the moment. And our industry is just starting to feel this a little bit. I'm, like when I founded, Dragonfly, I was ahead of the curve, maybe way too ahead with multi-factor. But I'm also sensing that the next round of challenges is going to be mindfulness in our industry. And it's interesting that even, just dropping off my daughter to school, and I drop her off, there's a shopping center across the road, which is a shopping center car park. She walks across the road, I get a coffee. And I happened to walk past the newsstand, and it was a finance magazine, how to make money and how to use mindfulness to make money. So it's mindfulness is just now hitting every different sort of domain in everything that people do. So yeah, it's kind of like, it's interesting. I'll be wondering where we go and how we do, and what tools we kind of bring to the table to help people deal with these situations.
Yeah, and to your point, I think what in my view, there have been a lot of things that have happened in the last few years, which were not
Right.
quote unquote normal. Whatever normal is, they were not. So I think it's to add to that, you saw in the aftermath of COVID, or actually as a result in many ways, with people working from home, lockdowns and the rest, companies, businesses, governments had to adapt, and digital transformation became turbocharged. So I think you saw a big change where organizations had to serve people digitally via technology, and as a result, cybersecurity, had to play catch up and had to go along the journey very quickly. Things change. Cyber threats, they keep evolving, and they will evolve because if the crime follows where money is, crime follows where businesses, crime follows where people are, and if people are online, people are connected. That's where crime goes. And you see the nation state aspect of it with the hyper connected society we are in. Nation states will leverage that for their own gains. Be it espionage, be it gaining advantages in the context of diplomacy, trade secrets, stealing intellectual property, whatever that might be. So there are different factors that are coming into play here, all of which has raised expectations on cybersecurity professionals. And I think that, to me, the external perspective has evolved. Regulations, you mentioned data breaches, the pressure generally from the public on keeping things safe. I think it is all contributing to it. So there is an external perspective, but what you brought up, Branko, also is stress, and you mentioned the brain and the tiger chasing, and then I think that's such a key point because one thing which you and I have kind of talked about is the fact that our brains are not designed to make us happy. That's not the purpose of the brain. Our brains are designed to keep us survival mode. Is essentially our survival is our brain's function. So we need to have that ability to kind of recognize that. So Branko, some of the things that I know you have passionately talked about are in the area of, okay, how do you take a step back, detach yourself from what's happening, and still continue to function? So I'm keen to get your thoughts on. We know the brain's a problem in some ways; it's very important. But how do you control your brain?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think there is elements to it where at points you don't realize that sometimes you're just in a place, it just happens, you just appear, like you just magically appear in this, if it was a cartoon, you just appear up in that space and your mind is there. And you've kind of looking around and you've kind of now got a different set of thoughts going through your head that you had maybe 2 weeks ago or a month ago. And you don't know what caused it. There was probably lots of elements, or there were shifts, usually seismic shifts in things around you to get to a space like that. And usually, I think to your point, what you're probably referring to is traumatic events, I think, shape us a lot as well in terms of our ability. And I think if I give an example, I mentioned this in our talk to a degree, was, I had this constant, difficulty with my partner, my wife, and it was like understanding, obviously she was a great supporter in the business. She was, there side by side as we built it along. The business in itself it has the ups and downs and roller coaster ride. And people think of that, oh, that's just a monetary thing. But that ups and downs actually really has a psychological effect as well. And that can be long lasting. Now, for me personally, that didn't have any kind of impact on me. I'm quite a strong person. I can push through. I'm very optimistic. So I drive. I don't see through a pessimistic outlook. I don't think I could have started the business if I did. And I always pushed forward. And we're starting to kind of pull ourselves out of these conundrums with, facing downward trends, upward trends in the business where we've got some steady upward trending. And we were seeing we're starting to see where this was taking us, and it was all positive and upside. But yet my partner, she still felt very deflated and conflicted by what had just happened, because this is not an overnight success. This is 5, 10, 15 years of hard work. And I was always saying to her, look, this is it, just look forward, look through the front windows, the windscreen of the car in the forward direction of what's down the road for us. It's looking all up. But she couldn't get her mindset out of looking in the rearview mirror and constantly reflecting on the past. So her vision of her life was different to what I was seeing. I was seeing the road ahead. She was seeing the road in the past, and that drove her behavior and interaction around that. So, and whenever we'd have a slight sort of shift forward, she couldn't help but find herself back in that negative headspace around that sense. So, back to what I said earlier, I don't think you can always remain happy. And I think it's about understanding for her what was causing that rear view mirror. And it wasn't until I understood that a bit more and I did this hacking the brain. Okay, we've got these great tools and resources to us at the moment to understand why does someone look forward and why does someone look back. And you see lots of information saying, people are just saying, just focus on forward, don't look on back. So you go to that message to her and you say, just look forward, don't focus on back. Everyone's telling us that's what you got to do. And it didn't move the needle. And then I was going, this is not right. And then I looked again, and I kind of uncovered something. And there's a lot of a lot of material out there and studies, but it was until you labeled something, you really couldn't start to repair it. And I realized that at that point, and particularly what it was a traumatic experience for her. And so we labeled it as trauma. So as soon as that was that, I could sort of say to her, look, regretfully, I've put you in a position where you've experienced trauma, rather than, I'm really apologetic that I left my high income role and went out and took a risk and we gambled on it and look where we are. It's a very different conversation to what you're acknowledging. When I acknowledged that actually is what happened to her, it almost went away. The rearview mirror started to disappear. And now, like, we're seeing this onboardness. I'm using her as an example. I think we all have, different areas where we kind of look at and we have to unpack and start to understand where it's coming from. And we all find ourselves in a position sometimes where, we're not in what we can consider a good space. The challenge there is to ensure that, you look to find ways to help yourself get out of that space, trying to, I think this is where the point of discussion that you were pointing towards was, you step back, you literally close the door. Like, I've had conversations with very busy CIOs that say they just don't have time in the day. They're demanded of them. There's so many demands of them, and what they're dealing with internally around bureaucracy or the strategic politics inside what they're working through is just all demanding for them and stressful. And I've literally just said to them, look, find a room in your building, close the door, and walk in there. Oh, firstly, just no disturb, just totally shut out. This is totally lockout, no phone, no answering phone, an hour, 2 hours. And I was very fortunate in my business, I could do that. But, you've got to find 1 or 2 hours in the day where you can say, this is just my time right now, where I'm going to do a stock take. I'm going to do an accounting scenario and identify what are all my points that are causing me this distress. And literally, I would do this. I would go into a room, get a whiteboard, and I would just start to write what are all the things that are, around me that are causing all these things, and how do I, if this is impacting me here, how can I address that, and how can I change that? And like what I've learned just recently, because I think we're always learning, is that I was still perfecting this, is that I was trying to change the environment variables around me to get a happier life for myself. But what I've just realized is that if I change, that's the only way I'm going to get that happy life and that happy outcome. So with my wife and her experience is that when I changed and I said, I've got to accept this is your traumatic experience. So rather than trying to change her outlook on it, or rather than trying to change her to say, there's still upside in the business now, what's still your, why are you still held back by this? I can't understand it. So that's when you understand. So changing yourself, understanding yourself and doing that. So not easy. It's not easy, but as soon as you stop and take stock of where your situation, where your life is, you can understand what you can control and what you can't control. And then you should focus on what you can control. And then things that you can't control, and if you don't like those things, you should find a way to move away from them or change your, surroundings around anything, a way to do with that.
Wow, Branko, you there's so much you shared in that, in terms of insights that people can learn from. Firstly, thank you for sharing the story. I think it's what it comes down to is what you mentioned is you got to some point just pause, and you got to pause and you got to observe. Is what you mentioned when you said, examples of busy executives, CIO, CISO, so forth, is the idea of, slow down, put yourself in the room. Because if you detach yourself from the situation and you understand that a lot of what is putting you in that, constant frenzy, if I might call it, is your brain, and you are not necessarily your brain. You control your brain. And if you walk back and take a step back, I think that's where you can see more clarity in terms of what matters and what is noise, and how do you kind of focus on that. I think that to me was a very important insight. The other thing you mentioned, which was really valuable, was the aspect of trauma, or the aspect of holding on to a grudge or a bad memory or a bad experience. I think because our brain is wired to keep us in a survival mode and not wired to keep us happy, it's important that we also find happy anchor points and a happy situation which we can go back. It's funny. It's actually not funny. It's actually kind of sad sometimes, funny and sad, that far too often we relive experiences in our mind where we were upset I should have said this thing to that person when this person said something to me. We very rarely relive happy things,
Yeah.
because you mentioned our bodies respond to thoughts and memories as if it's a real
Mm.
event. And when we're reliving negative events all the time in our minds, we kind of putting stress on our bodies. So I think those happy
Mm.
things. And when we started our talk, uh, we actually took we had a bit of an experiment, because we started with a 30 second of just asking all of
Yeah,
our
that's right.
audience members to put their phones down,
Mm.
close their eyes, and just breathe for 20-30 seconds, and think of one happy memory that they had the previous day of the conference. Just one happy memory. And it's, and I know when people walked up to us after our session, they
Mm.
actually found that really good.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, that's great.
it was 30 seconds, not even. And then that helped people, because I think we are just so much, in your words, just on all the
Yeah.
time, that we
Mm.
just don't take enough time to just
But
put that. And I think that's
did
the
you see how
challenge.
much people were looking at their phones saying, "Can I really put this down?" It was the anxiety level of, "Can I really put this phone down?"
Yeah,
Um,
and that is
but
that is it. I think
I
that's
think you're right, and the key point, and this is the science and the studies points to this, is our memories come from experiences that we've experienced. So, for example, everyone kind of classic one is everyone remembers where they were at 9/11. It was a mind-changing experience, and when that happened, and that really elicited some experiences in the brain patterns and the activity in your brain, that wired in the memory. Right. And that's why we can always go back to that particular memory and point in time. So every experience we have, and we probably have more bad than good. Probably that's the sign. That's probably a reason why we don't have so many positive, happy memories. I know when I go on holidays, I can remember those moments, especially with my kids when they were younger. So it's you got to kind of remember that to have happy memories, you got to create the experience. Right. Okay. So the memory is not going to just appear and stay in your brain. You have to actually create an experience. And a happy memory is literally even something that is going for a walk in nature that you don't normally do. You will remember that for quite some time, because it's had that awe effect on you. Nature tends to do that. It's chaotic when you're walking through the forest, it's way busy, but the sound and the smells and the experience and the sound of when you're walking on the gravel and the ground, and if there's a river and all those sorts of sensory things coming through to you, they create that experience that get wired into your brain. So happiness and sadness and experience that we call on, to your point, when you had an argument with someone that you love or something like that, that'll be wired into your brain until
Mm.
you get enough memories to wire over the top of that, and becomes less important. So the key point there is get out and have experiences, you know.
I
Mm.
completely agree, and I think we'll talk about later in the chat. I also want to talk about specific things people can do, like motion and others. But I want to move it slightly for this question. I want to get your thoughts on something, Branko, that is becoming prominent in cybersecurity. Bringing it to cybersecurity for
Yep.
just a little bit is you are starting to see expectations, and this has come about in surveys and research out there, where there is an expectation that the CISO still has the accountability for any data breach, right? And I think that kind of creates a challenge. Board directors also understand the importance of cyber. There is a recognition of how important it is, but there is still that lack of alignment between their expectations and the reality. And while we've kind of learned to assume sometimes, and maybe erroneously, in cybersecurity, that breaches are inevitable, is how we respond to them. I don't think a lot of people understand even or have the thing that, well, breaches are inevitable. I mean, that is not 100% out there. I think there is an expectation that, well, breaches are not inevitable. They can be prevented. So I think you have this misalignment between what I would like to call, senior business stakeholders and cybersecurity professionals and cybersecurity in general. How do we start bridging that lack of alignment between these two very important parties who both understand the problem, both acknowledge the problem, but have a different set of expectations?
I guess to that, Drag, I would say that trust in the board, trust in your CEO, it really comes through like having transparency, and I think comes through partnership. So when the CISO and the CIO or the risk committee and the board are all on the same level, against this particular threat or risk, then it's really the responsibility is spread across that whole group of people. When there's just an expectation that one person solves it and they fail to do that, they just become the scapegoat. Right? They just become the one that's kind of, been pushed to reflect that there's the remediation that we've done is that we've fired the person that didn't implement the controls or didn't foresee that this was an attack looming. And I think the expect breach or assume breach is true. I mean, it's a paradigm that's been now started. It's about 3 or 4 years now. We were on defense mode, build walls, keep them out, defend. Now we've gone, no, well, we can't do that. They're inside already if you don't already know it. But in my mind, to the board, to the CIO, to the CEO, you can say that statement, but I would also say it's unacceptable, right? And when you frame it as unacceptable, it's unacceptable in the way that you have, custodianship and responsibility around the data you're holding on that are, of citizens and so forth. The question there is that who really owns that data once it's with the entity that's holding it. Yeah. But not to get into semantics, but if you look at it from how do you reduce the single point of failure on the CISO, is the CISO has to have a very good relationship, has to be a really good communicator, has to be a good person that can kind of talk up and down and across the organization to kind of get everyone on board and on the same page. Because, awareness across the organization, and the CISO eventually becomes the leader, right, in this fight against, the bad actors and the threats that they're facing. But the leader requires the support from the board and not this CISO reporting to the board. Because all that is that's just metrics, right? And that is effectively, it's really a financial measurement. How much money are we investing to protect ourselves, but how much are we actually doing to protect ourselves? So it's when we shift that question of why are we being hacked to how can we prevent ourselves from being hacked or breached, changes the conversation in the boardroom and to those that try to solve the problems around that.
Yeah. No, I think it's a very interesting perspective. And to me, you brought up, some really good words there. I think one of them was, being transparent and authenticity is a really important aspect of it. And I think I also want to cast attention to cybersecurity professionals. And I say, look, it's fine to complain. And sometimes there are reasons to complain. But have we done everything that is in our power to influence that? And what I mean is, I think to me, we need to speak the business language, which means we need to understand our business. We need to understand what is our organization out to do. What are the products? What are the services that we offer? And I think that's really important because we don't exist. The organizations very rarely exist to do cybersecurity. I reckon never. If the organization went out of business, well, so does the cybersecurity team.
Yeah.
In the midst of the daily grind, sometimes that's forgotten. So I think when we understand our business and we start framing the cyber threats that we face in the context of the business which we are in, because not every business is the target of a nation state, a direct target. Not every business has to worry about operational technology concerns. So I think some businesses do. And I think that really matters as to what threats you face. So if you understand your business, you can understand the threats, and then that allows you to have meaningful conversations around the controls that you have around those threats. The other thing which I would suggest is in what I was, to your point, was the relationship you have. I also think when you communicate to executives, communicate to the board, if you can frame your conversations with regards to risk and financials, and you start to detach, your conversations from just mere vulnerabilities and other operational type data, which is relevant for some committees, but your board has trusted you to do that. The conversation you want to have at that level, in my view, is around risk, around financials, around the threats you see, and how the general trajectory of your cybersecurity program is moving. Do you understand your assets? What are the things that you need to be concerned about? I think if you start having that allows you to more meaningfully then get resources, meaningfully get investments, because you're kind of having that conversation. Because far too often I see if you haven't crossed off all of those boxes and you're still complaining, you're always going to be on that, on that hamster wheel of sorts where you just always kind of never resources that are enough for you, never the problems that you are able to solve properly. So it's kind of a vicious circle in a way.
Yeah, 100%. I think what I find when I'm in my role in the business, when I'm talking to customers to understand where they're wanting to go and what their challenges are, like literally, it's quite clear that there are two types of businesses, and fundamentally, it's driven from one particular reason for this. There are those that have a risk-based culture to cybersecurity, and that's throughout their whole security program. It's very risk-centric. And that really ties into the board, and the board can kind of understand that, to your point, speaking the language, speaking the context. And then the other side to that is a very IT-centric business. And the reason for that, risk doesn't even come into the picture with IT-centric, because they're busy putting out fires, and they're very point solution, get AV, get a firewall, I turn MFA on, we didn't have it before, but they don't really look at the risks of why they're doing it holistically. They probably don't have a risk management program. Even the business itself is probably not mature enough to have a risk management program. Because remember, we're dealing with businesses with that are doing reasonable amount of business with reasonable amount of customer data, but still the businesses themselves are not as mature as some of the ASX 100, for example. So the key point, I'll tie it back to why we see IT-centric and risk-centric, is really around resources. So a business that's either low on like financially, it cannot resource a program or resource people into roles, are IT-centric. Ones where there is substantial funding for people and programs, that then is a risk-based culture. If they're getting that money and then still not looking at the risk perspective, then they're really in danger, because they should be. Their businesses will be looking at risk. They just haven't implemented the cybersecurity risks into that lens, right? So they still need to one more sort of leap into that there, but there is a risk management program. And largely I can kind of it's like almost judge of character. I can speak to an organization for being in this business for over 20 years. I can almost pinpoint where this cybersecurity maturity is at and what the key problems are. But the problem that's quick and easy for me to identify, the actual way and getting out of that and maturing and growing has got lots of hurdles. But again, like hacking the brain, it's all about change, right? So it's about identifying what these things are, naming them, accepting them. And I find the businesses that do best between cyber and business and C-level or executive leadership teams are the ones that accept, we know we're in a bad position. We know our cyber is not good. Let's do something about it. The ones that are facing a challenge are the teams and the operational environments that have been, veneering the results to, give the, visibility around what looks like a secure environment. So the impression is there, maybe intentionally, unintentionally, but it gives the impression to management, maybe for poor reporting or intentionally bad reporting, and then there's no funding to that. And those in that operational mindset just keep slogging away to fight fires, to not show upper management that there's any reason to question their service to that internal business unit, because it is a service that's provided internally. So that's where it comes, and that's all that ties back to transparency, right? So
and I think if you draw the parallels between the two topics we've kind of covered so far, it comes down to self-awareness and just awareness of things in general. And it requires you to get out of the grind, be it personal operational grind of just running and chasing things, or as an organization just running, from a cybersecurity perspective, without kind of just taking a step back, to your point, looking at things holistically, contextualizing the threats, risks that matter, the metrics we produce, the control investments we do. I think you need definitely to kind of just take that view. And it comes down, and you mentioned change management. It's such a key point, because cybersecurity, a lot of it is a change management exercise. It impacts people. It's not about technical controls. There's so much more. And I think even technical controls involves an element of change management. So I think it's that to me is a nice parallel between the two topics we've covered. Now, kind of just looking at, so we've done a bit of giving our audience hopefully some suggestions on how they can address the alignment between business and cyber. But going back to our the first part of our conversation around the stress aspect of it, around the mindfulness aspect of things, what are some of the practical, simple things, without us getting esoteric? What are the practical, simple things? Because there are lots you and I have discussed and have actually used that people can do to get themselves in the right frame of mind to be effective personally and professionally. What are the things, Branko, that you can suggest that are just practical, simple?
Well, look, I think there's two sides, and I think it depends which way you're coming at it. So there's an element that the stress angle. That's just simply taking stock. That's looking back, and we had this conversation where you apply this sort of reconnaissance across your body. You probe it, mentally in your mind. You write down things. You look for vulnerabilities in yourself. And be open to accepting those vulnerabilities and ignoring them, acknowledging them. You don't have to tell people about them. You don't have to show, if you worry about being vulnerable and how people might react. The point is that you know about them and you accept them. And, everyone has that internal voice that's always talking to them about their vulnerabilities or, preventing them or self-sabotaging into a way that they can get into a positive mindset or do something that they intend to do. So the thing is quieting that internal voice to focus on what you want to do. And you can do that through, like we said, that relaxation and just taking time out to take stock. But the other way is drawing up a plan around how you get yourself out of it, right? So you have to have some, way to move yourself out of the situation that you find yourself in. That requires a plan, and then executing on that plan. That's the key part. And I didn't say goals because, just goal setting alone, I don't know how many people set goals and just get disappointed and then feel guilty and frustrated because they didn't meet them. But you've got to create a plan, and then you've got to do things towards that, and then measure that progress and that improvement, because that will then create that positivity back into, something is actually happening for you and you're getting into an area that's, positive. The other side to that is when you have a sense of it can actually stop you in your tracks, and it's not even necessarily depression. You just might be overworked, too many tasks, too much demands from you, and then also you might be climbing up an executive ladder, and you may have a sense of imposter syndrome, or you might be even a stock analyst, you might have imposter syndrome, or how you present a report to somebody, and all that might just prevent you from doing your work, and I think that's another element that you need to kind of address, and also put a plan around identifying those things and measuring them. What it comes back down to again is I have this concept of measuring my own performance and trying to work out where I can improve and what I need to do to kind of improve myself around that. But the kind of bridge between the two, whether you need to architect a plan out of a stressful situation, out of a negative state, is above and beyond everything is you have to believe you can do it. Right? You have to believe in the positive outcome, optimism, optimistic. The other things are all just tooling. They'll just get you through that, doing that. But then what you got to do is you got to fence off your feelings, right? So if you picture all these things inside, we've got these things inside the critical area of our lives. Belief, working hard, getting out of our comfort zone, our plan, and executing. You put them in the inside, in the critical area of what we're doing. And on the outer perimeter, you put your feelings and you put your behaviors. And what you do is you don't allow those things to affect the things that are in the middle and the critical, because the feelings and the plan and the behaviors will sabotage any plan that you put together. As soon as you start to go back up, I've slipped today. Weight loss, the classic example. I've slipped today, so I'm going to be negative about it all day today. I knew I can never lose weight, and if you see me, I'm not necessarily the lightest person on earth, but I don't make it my focus. I accept that this is a situation that I'm in, and I can choose to change that if I want to dial it up and dial it down. And I think everyone in this world, doesn't matter. This is how I've come to accept my situation, is that everyone in this world thinks about weight, right? Doesn't matter what they weigh, and doesn't matter what they eat. There isn't a day doesn't go by that there isn't a calorie displayed on some menu somewhere that people are thinking about weight. So it's everywhere. The thing is, to kind of come around to that so you can move forward, is to accept it, rather than fight it.
It's a lot of wisdom in what you just outlined in terms of acceptance. But I also think, Branko, you mentioned the plan, and you mentioned the element of tracking progress. That's such an important point, because you see this everywhere. Achievements don't necessarily make us happy long term.
Not at all.
Things
Even
don't
material,
make us happy
even
long term.
money, none of that. Fulfillment makes you happy.
Fulfillment, your journey towards something, progress. And I think you can only track that if you look behind and see where you come from. And some of the good tips that I have heard and that I've personally tried to incorporate as much as possible is every night, I keep a little notepad by my bedside table, and every night I've tried to do this, every day possible, is I jot down three things that day that I did well.
That's
Three
great.
things. And three things tomorrow that I absolutely need to do.
Mm.
Now, do I always hit those three things the next day?
Mm.
No, but I know where my priorities are. And they can be a combination of work things, they can be a combination of personal thing. And sometimes once in a while, it could be something, which is just something that I want to do. Well, I'm
Mm.
going to spend 1 hour and watch an episode.
Mm.
You know what? The time that you plan to waste is not wasted time. It's
Yeah.
when you are just unconsciously going through life. I think that's the challenge. So I think that tracking progress resonates with me. The other thing which I know we talked about, which is an important bit, is just how you kind of conduct like your motions or your posture. Where if you're depressed and if you just kind of you kind of hunch over and you always things
Oh,
anxious,
yeah.
just open
Mm.
up and you just kind of talk. That in itself has so much power
Yeah, even how to
to
talk and
change
walk.
your
Yeah.
outlook, the way you move. And I think that to
The
me, the energy,
stride and all those things. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
absolutely. And it's there is, not sure if you heard of this gentleman called Jocko. He has this podcast. He's an ex US Army soldier, and he's written books and he does podcasts and
I know him, yeah, but yeah, I've probably heard. Yeah,
yeah.
does he
And
talk
one
about the
thing,
one where it's important to make your bed in the morning?
well, yeah, that is. I think that's Jordan Peterson says a lot of that, which is
Mm.
good. I think a lot of folks talk about the importance of making bed, which is kind of an accomplishment you do. But one of the things that I actually liked was one of his videos became viral. Was when he said "good." So, and the idea of that video was like anything bad that happens, you didn't get a promotion, you didn't get resources, or you failed. Good. Start with that. Just say good.
Yeah,
Why?
yeah,
Because you learned something from it.
that's right. And again, it's acceptance to move forward. Yeah,
Exactly. I think
yeah.
that's the thing. So that
Mm.
aspect of just the fact that you can say good
Mm.
means you're alive. You
Yeah.
have something left in you still, and it's such a deep thing. It's simple, like you said. The radical acceptance bit of it is not try to fight everything, not this toxic positivity business where
Mm.
you're just faking it. But I think between that extreme and the extreme of just being negative all the time, I think there is a real aspect of that is good to be found in situations if you just give yourself that opportunity to find it. So I think that to me is to your acceptance point is an important bit. uh, so, Branko, we've covered lots of ground here. We've covered, things that are cyber specific, that are more psychology, our personal growth. Uh, the one question I do want to have for you in kind of the closing aspects of our episode today is,
Yeah.
you've done a lot of things personally, professionally. Uh, what are some of the tips or advice you would give to people that inform the growth mindset? Because I know you are a person who embodies growth mindset. How do people kind of adopt that? What are the things they can do to become successful in their personal and professional lives?
Wow, $1 million question, Gerard. It's like asking what's the equation to success, or what's the equation to happiness? Um, I think having an open mind is you're not too wedded to a particular outcome. All right. So if you have some plan, and for example, take the notion that you want to launch a campaign, and if you're too wedded to how that campaign might need to run, you may sabotage the campaign if you're too wedded to it. Being open-minded is just to accept changes as they come along and building them into your plan rather than closing them off and trying to, see them not in a way that could potentially, how can I take this event or this thing, this experience, and how can I add that to further myself and move it forward? And looking at always taking, an open mind is always taking a step forward. Is my mind is physically, if you can just pick yourself up and take one step forward, that's what open mindedness is. But closed mindset is, it's standing still, right? It's not making any progress. It's just, you just don't accept anything that's around you, and you just want to kind of shut down and not allow it. And that might come from Where that might come from is people may have lots of other behavioral aspects that impact that, and that might be anxiety. To point earlier, um, you know, imposter syndrome. It could be seen as being closed mind, but you've not really allowed yourself to open and look at yourself in a way that you can perform or you can do that task. And once you say, well, an open mind for me would be, let me try a way to how can I improve that? How can I break away? And to me, it's always the first. And I've had a few startups that I've mentored, and I said they're kind of hesitant to start. And I said, write the first sentence and the paragraph will follow, right? It's just making that first initial step to move and allowing yourself. And I think that all the reason why, like even it's anxiety or imposter syndrome, they're all taking a risk, right? It's all about taking a risk on yourself. And these are all words, these are not my wisdom. This is what I've kind of, learned and absorbed from reading and studies and so forth. But the one that sticks with me the most, there's two that stick with me the most, is that one, we're afraid to be imperfect, right? We have this need to always look like I've got a palm tree in the background and waves crashing behind me, but I'm literally in my office. That was Chirag's idea. And, there's this constant way of this imagery we're putting out that we're always perfect when we're really not. We're imperfect. And we've got that issue where we're afraid to do that. And the other thing that sticks out for me is, those are looking for happiness. What's the secret of happiness? Well, happiness is fulfillment, right? People think, and it's quite understandable, that if you come from where you're having a tight budget to make payments on home loans, especially in this day with high inflation and interest rates, you have a feeling that the money will release that and the money will make you happy. But trust me, it doesn't. Because what needs to happen is you need to be fulfilled inside from what you are doing. You have to have purpose internally for what you're doing. When you get to my point, it's like it's the give back. So it's having a conversation now with Chirag that makes me feel better and purposeful and happy in my life about doing that. The opposite to fulfillment, and by the way, fulfillment is happiness. That's what creates happiness. There's the answer for this. Write that one down.
Oh, it's really good. And I think that advice, which is a lot of rich advice there, the advice is around open-mindedness. To me also means that you're willing to absorb experiences, you're willing to learn, you're curious.
Don't be afraid to fail. And there's always caveats, right? There's always bumper guards, right? I never ask people to just step out on a ledge. Like it's always like, financially and in your own circumstances, even before we think about making this move in this direction, is the support there for you?
Yeah.
Right? Because if it's not, within 1 month, 2 months to 3 months, you're not going to be focusing on your business or your startup or your security program or anything else. You're going to be pulled by these other elements in your personal life. Even if you want to be, for example, if you want to be an executive leader or a CISO and it's demanding in hours and time, you can have the support of your partner and your family to do that, and that's the other reason. It's like those things are not sustainable over a long period of time. There needs to be change, role changes. We'll see in time, a number of people will be exiting out of our business, out of our industry as a result of just the burnout rate. It's not just burnout on the job, which is by definition that's what burnout is, but it's the impact that has on people in their personal lives. But to kind of just quickly wrap up my little segment back to this question was that, fulfillment is happiness, but stress is what creates, stress is the other side to that. Stress and anxiety is what makes people unhappy. So so it's quite interesting, because if you can work on identifying how to get out of those stressful and anxious and anxiety and work on yourself, work on your body, you have everything at your disposal to work on you. Only you can work on you and only you can change you. Then you can kind of move towards fulfillment, focus on fulfillment.
Yeah. No, it's and I think the point of your body, taking care of yourself, I think that's such a key bit. And also, the person we show up to our families is such an important thing. And I like to remind myself of that. When I had a long day at work and I'm in the office and I'm coming back home, I'm just really tired. I'm physically tired. But I remind myself that when I get back home, is that the person I want to show? And I think it's because my family deserves the best of me, not the tired, look, once in a while we all have bad days. So it's not, I'm not talking about exception. I'm talking about generally the rule is you walk in and you want to present that side. You want to walk in happy. You want to be, and I think that to me sometimes take actually you got to put in the effort because it's not going to come automatically. Your natural default state might be to be, tired or exhausted or cribby. So I think to your point of just kind of that aspect of yourself and monitor your own feelings is such a key point. And what you mentioned around even imposter syndrome, I think all of that in a way comes from the fear of failure, the fear of judgment of others.
Yeah.
And I think my way of beating that or my way of overcoming that is just thinking 30 years ahead. If I'm fortunate enough to live a very long life and I look back and I think of all the stuff I could have done and I did not do because of somebody's judgment who probably doesn't even know me, I would actually have a lot of regret. And I think that's not what I want to live with. So you need to be, I think that's where if you shed that fear of failure, so many things open up in your life and you put your ego aside. That to me, Branko, is like, you mentioned to you, the happiness aspect of me, of what it comes to you. I think for me, the times I'm unhappy is when I'm focused on my ego. It's when it's something about me or something about what I've done or something about what I want to accomplish. If it's all about that, I think that's a problem. So I think there's no right or wrong answer to what you mentioned. Like we were talking, and actually, Steve Wozniak, who was at the conference last week,
It was,
he
yes.
had a really interesting. What did he say about happiness? More smiles, less frowns.
Right, yeah.
That kind of stuck with me, and to your point, how do you create more smiles? Just those experiences. So, no,
Yeah.
brilliant stuff.
But I think the one thing on that is another key point to all those things that I just mentioned, they don't happen on their own. And like even to change yourself. And if you think about it, leaving you with the words of fulfillment as a key driver to success and happiness. But the other key word I'd leave you with, and if you think about in your life, to your point when you mentioned, just sprung to my mind when you mentioned in the past and in the future, the key thing that drives your life are the decisions you make.
Yeah.
So if you think about every decision in your life, whether it's to buy a house or to get married, that's what rudimentarily changed your life trajectory, right? So you have to choose to make decisions. That's what drives, the outcomes. But, to your point, you come home happy or angry from a full day's work or work. I've had that. I've traveled. I've been up from 5. I just had, drive, picking up kids and picked up my wife in the car, and we're all in the car and we're all lamenting about who's driving more than the other. And, it becomes a tussle. But at the end of it, we have to say, stop, hold on a minute. That's not the outcome we're trying to drive here. We're both tired. We've said something in untired states. We need to kind of unwind and go back. So it's also acknowledging the situation that you're finding yourself in through stress and through being tired and stepping back and saying, hey, that's just a moment that we're all facing because we're all stressed, because we won't get out of it. It's not a magic
No.
solution,
And
silver bullet or
yeah.
panacea to get out of the what we're faced in the stressful world. But I think the final thing that I've kind of, again, constant improvement, constant thinking about, and you mentioned it earlier about toxic positivity. It's not the solution. It's not kind of mentoring, today I'll be happy, etc. But I think if you think of coming and you want to position yourself, I want to come from a happy state, I want to be in a happy state. It doesn't matter. Like, you can get cut off from the car coming out your driveway, and if you say I'm going to be in a happy state, you're just going to let that fly. But if you come out all anxious and you've just had to iron a shirt to get out the driveway, you've spilt coffee on yourself, you're getting a very a state that's kind of building up frustration, and then you get cut off. You might try to it all kind of can unfold more and more in your mind. But if you say, look, I'm just going to let that go, I choose to be in a happy state, the fact that I was cut off is not going to change the world. And you continue on to driving. But if you don't have that moment where you can do that, then you're going to allow all those frustrations. You'll come in and you'll have your first morning meeting at 9 a.m. with your staff, and you're just going to go, blah, and it's not going to be great.
No, I totally agree. And I think happiness is a choice. I mean, in many areas, you can choose to be happy, even in the most difficult of circumstances, or you can choose to be miserable even when you have everything. So I think it goes down. Branko, the last thing there's one, I'll get your thoughts on this and we'll close out.
We can talk a lot, can't we?
I know. And and that's why every time we get together, it's always an awesome conversation because, there's just so much I learn from you every time you speak. The one thing that we both have in common is we read a lot. And I think that's important for our growth. I read a book by Jordan Peterson, and one of his things in the book was a statement I actually really liked, and I want to get your thoughts, and then we'll close out. Was
Yeah.
Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not who somebody is today. And that to me is something I remind myself all the time, because there is never an end to a rat race, never an end to that competition. Is, to me, am I better today, personally, professionally, health wise, skill wise, than what I was yesterday? If I am, then it's a checkbox, good. If not, gotta work. What does it mean to you?
Look, I've followed Jordan Peterson for a long time, and even before his books and before he's kind of becoming into mainstream, and I think he says a lot of interesting things. That one in particular, it's true in that it's setting your own sort of expectations to not feel that you're needing to always constantly be absolutely perfect. I think that's probably where that comes from. And I think it talks about this 1% incremental improvement every day. So that compounded will have a massive effect on your life. And so if you can just kind of tweak a little bit the next day, it's not asking for a big ask, you can kind of improve your life dramatically over time. And the point being there is you repeat that day in, day out, so it compounds and you get the value and return around that on yourself and your personal development. So yeah, I think what that means is always pick up positive habits along the way as much as you can, and I think I don't totally agree that you can get improved every single day, but as long as you're not going backwards, right? And I also kind of think, you might slip, but you got to kind of forgive yourself for that and kind of wind back up and move on. Because I think to even have that, strict regimented 1%, I'm going to improve, eventually you're going to fail one day and you're going to take that harder, and all the work you've done is going to just get unwound. So again, it's just that it's all about just good habits, following good steer in your life, making good decisions every day. So thinking about how you are a better person every day, not focusing on the gaps in your life and what you haven't achieved today, and then being negative about that. So focus on what you have achieved. To your point earlier.
I think we could, like, to your point, we could keep talking about this. And there is also a really good book called Gap in the Gain, and it exactly talks about that idea. Branko is don't focus on the gaps, focus on the gains. And even if you slip, that's okay, as long as you understand that you slipped and you can move ahead. So I think that acceptance. Look, you've been very generous with your time, Branko. So I'll be respectful of it. Thank you so much. It is always an amazing conversation every time we chat. So I really appreciate it. Hopefully the audience got some valuable that they can leverage and build and incorporate in their own lives.
Great.
So with that, thank you again, and I'm sure we'll chat again soon.
Thanks, Chirag. Take care, everyone.